The year was 1939. Across Asia, the rising sun burned bright, yet behind its glow, shadows began to stretch for almost a decade. Japan had been locked in war with China, a war that refused to end. Cities had fallen, armies had marched, but the land itself seemed endless. Every victory led to another battlefield, another grave. The empire was growing, but its strength was bleeding away. Every ship, every tank, every bullet demanded fuel, oil, steel, and men, and Japan was running out of all. Factories in Tokyo roared day and night, forging weapons for a war that could not be won. Villages, families prayed for sons who would never return. In the streets, people whispered that maybe, just maybe, the gods had turned away. But far from Asia, in the West, another storm was rising. In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland. Europe exploded into war. Britain and France declared their fury, and once again, the world began to burn. Japan, the chaos was an opportunity. The empires of the West were distracted, their colonies in Asia left thin and unguarded. From the jungles of Malaya to the oil fields of the Dutch East Indies, the resources Japan needed lay waiting, and the generals began to dream. By 1940, Japan's leaders faced a choice: continue the slow death in China, or strike south, fast, bold, and ruthless. The South meant oil. The South meant survival, but there was risk. To move south meant crossing the path of the West, the British, the Dutch, and most dangerously, the Americans. For now, the United States still sold Japan oil, iron, and rubber, the blood of its empire. But in Washington, American patience was wearing thin. News of the massacres in China had reached the world. The words Nanjing and atrocities had turned admiration into disgust. President Franklin D. Roosevelt watched Japan carefully. He saw a nation growing stronger through conquest, spreading its influence through fire and fear. He knew what came next. In Tokyo, however, the mood was defiant. Japan saw itself as a new power, destined to rule Asia. The emperor's ministers spoke of a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, a vast union led by Japan, free from Western rule. It sounded noble in speeches, but in truth, it meant domination. That same year, the world shifted again. In Europe, Germany crushed France. Hitler's armies stormed through the West like thunder. The old empires fell silent, and as Britain stood alone against Nazi power, Japan made its move. On September 27, 1940, Japan signed the Tripartite Pact with Germany and Italy. 3 nations bound by ambition. Together, they would carve the world between them, Germany ruling Europe, Italy the Mediterranean, and Japan the East. In Tokyo, banners waved and crowds cheered. Newspapers called it the axis of power. Children in schools bowed to portraits of Hitler beside their emperor. The message was clear: Japan had chosen its side, and the world would soon tremble for it. But alliances are easy to sign, and harder to survive. Behind the scenes, many in Japan's navy worried. They knew Germany's victories could not last forever, and more importantly, they feared the United States. The Pacific Ocean was vast, but not vast enough to keep America away. For now, though, the war in Europe kept Washington busy, and so Japan acted. In 1940, Japanese forces moved into northern Indochina. The French colony weakened and broken by Germany's conquest. The Japanese said they came as protectors. In truth, they came as conquerors. It was a silent invasion, no great battles, no parades, just soldiers marching through the forests, airfields seized, and new bases built. Each step brought Japan closer to the oil and rubber of Southeast Asia, and closer to the line the Americans had drawn. In the White House, Roosevelt and his advisors debated how far would Japan go, and how long could the United States stay silent. Then, in July 1941, Japan crossed the final line. Its armies moved again. This time into southern Indochina, threatening the British colonies and the Dutch East Indies themselves. The world watched, breathless. Roosevelt's patient snap. He froze all Japanese assets in the United States and, more importantly, he cut off the oil supply. In one stroke, the veins of Japan's war machine were severed. Without American oil, Japan's tanks would rust, its planes would fall silent, its empire would suffocate. The reaction in Tokyo was one of shock, then fury. How could a nation of merchants dictate terms to an empire of warriors? The answer was clear to many in uniform. If Japan was to live, it must fight. Inside secret meetings, the generals and admirals gathered, voices clashed, fists struck tables, maps were marked and erased. Some urged diplomacy, others demanded war, and at the center of it all sat a man whose face betrayed no doubt: Hideki Tojo, Minister of War. Tojo was a soldier, not a politician. He believed hesitation was weakness. He believed surrender was worse than death, and he believed Japan must seize its destiny, no matter the cost. By the end of 1941, Tojo had risen to become prime minister. His eyes were fixed on one goal: to secure the resources Japan needed before America could stop them. But even Tojo knew that attacking America meant suicide, unless Japan struck first and struck hard enough to cripple its power. That was when a man named Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto stepped forward. A brilliant strategist, respected and feared, Yamamoto understood America better than anyone else in Japan. He had studied at Harvard, traveled its cities, seen its industry, its steel, its people. He knew what Japan was truly up against, and yet, he proposed the boldest plan of all. If Japan must fight, it would strike first, and strike with lightning. A surprise attack that would destroy the American Pacific Fleet before war was even declared. The target, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The room fell silent. The plan was madness or genius. Success meant Japan could see Southeast Asia without resistance. Failure meant certain doom. After hours of silence, Tojo agreed. The emperor approved. The die was cast. Yamamoto warned them, "For 6 months, I will run wild. After that, I can promise nothing." But no one listened. The empire had chosen its path. Autumn 1941. The Pacific lay calm, its surface glimmering beneath the rising sun. Beneath that calm, Japan prepared for the storm of a lifetime. In hidden harbors and snow-covered valleys, workers toiled in silence. Carriers were loaded with torpedoes, bombers, and hope. Sailors whispered farewells they could not explain. Even the wind seemed to carry secrets. Admiral Yamamoto's plan was unlike anything the world had seen. 6 aircraft carriers would travel more than 3,000 miles through icy northern seas. No lights, no radios, no signals. A ghost fleet, born from silence. Each sailor was told the same thing: if we fail, there will be no home to return to. On November 26, 1941, the task force, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, Shokaku, and Zuikaku, slipped from Japan's shores. Waves closed behind them, erasing all trace. Their destination was a name few of them had ever heard: Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Back in Tokyo, diplomats continued a dance of deception. They met with American officials, smiling politely, speaking of peace. But time was running out. Roosevelt's embargo was crushing Japan's economy. The military demanded action. As December approached, final orders arrived sealed in red wax. Once decoded, they read only one line: climb Mount Nitakaka 1208. It was the signal for war. December 8 in Tokyo, December 7 in Hawaii. At dawn, the fleet reached its launch point north of Oahu. The sea was still, the sky clear. Pilots lined the decks, engines trembling with life. Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, commanding the attack, gave a single nod, and the rising sun flags unfurled in the wind. Tora Tora. Tora. Tiger, 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 the code for complete surprise. The first wave roared into the sky, 183 planes slicing through the clouds. Dive bombers, torpedo planes, and fighters descended on the sleeping base below. Pearl Harbor lay quiet that Sunday morning. Sailors ate breakfast, a band prepared to play the anthem, and the world seemed at peace. Then came the sound, like 1,000 thunderclaps. Bombs fell, the sky turned black with smoke and fire. Battleships, Arizona, Oklahoma, West Virginia, California, were torn apart in seconds. Men leapt into burning oil-covered water, others were trapped below decks. The explosion of the USS Arizona shattered the harbor and the nation with it. Within minutes, the base became an inferno. In less than 2 hours, over 2,400 Americans were dead. 18 ships lay sunk or crippled. The Pacific Fleet, the pride of America, was left in ruins. But amid the chaos, crucial targets survived. The American aircraft carriers were not in port, they were out at sea, and soon they would become the weapon of revenge. As the Japanese planes returned to their carriers, some pilots cheered, others stayed silent. The mission was complete, yet Yamamoto's words echoed in the wind. I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve. Back in Tokyo, crowds filled the streets in celebration. Newspapers hailed a glorious victory. Radio announcers proclaimed that Japan now ruled the Pacific, but Yamamoto did not celebrate. He looked toward the horizon and whispered, 6 months. That is all we have. While America mourned, Japan struck again, almost simultaneously, across the Pacific. Hong Kong, Guam, Wake Island, the Philippines, each under attack. In the jungles of Malaya, Japanese troops landed under cover of darkness, British defenses collapsed, tanks moved like ghosts through the night. By December's end, Japan had conquered more territory in weeks than it had in years of war in China. The empire stretched from Manchuria to the edge of Australia. Everywhere the rising sun flew high, and for the first time, Tokyo truly believed it could win, but victory carried its own poison. As Japan expanded, its enemies multiplied. In Washington, Roosevelt addressed Congress. His voice trembled with anger but not fear. Yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. Thunderous applause followed. America was now at war. Factories shifted overnight to produce tanks, ships, and aircraft. Men lined up to enlist. Women filled the assembly lines. The sleeping giant had awakened. Yamamoto's warning had become prophecy. Across the Pacific, Japanese generals celebrated each new conquest. Singapore, Burma, the Dutch East Indies, the southern resource area was now under their control. Oil flowed once again, but with every victory came overconfidence. Japan's navy ruled the sea, yet the Americans had learned quickly. Their carriers moved like wolves, fast, invisible, relentless. The war had changed forever. No longer would battles be decided by battleships and honor, but by aircraft carriers, code breakers, and the will to outlast the storm. The Japanese Empire stood at its greatest extent, from the snowy peaks of Manchuria to the burning jungles of Burma, from the coasts of China to the islands of the South Pacific. Everywhere, the rising sun waved proudly in the wind. The world, it seemed unstoppable. The soldiers, it felt eternal. But deep inside Japan's military, some knew the truth: the higher you rise, the harder you fall. Admiral Yamamoto's fleet still ruled the ocean, but the Americans were moving, faster, smarter, and angrier than ever before. In the first months of 1942, Japan launched one victory after another. Singapore, the Gibraltar of the East, fell in February. More than 80,000 British troops surrendered in the largest defeat in British history. Soon after, the Philippines collapsed. American and Filipino soldiers were captured, forced on the Bataan Death March, a brutal journey through heat, starvation, and cruelty. For every Japanese victory, the world trembled, but in America, something else began to stir. A storm of revenge. Factories roared to life. Carriers were built faster than Japan could sink them, and in April 1942, the first spark of that revenge struck Tokyo itself. 16 American bombers, led by Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle, launched from the carrier Hornet on a daring raid over Japan. The bombs did little physical damage, but the psychological impact was enormous. For the first time, the Japanese homeland had been attacked. The illusion of invincibility was shattered. Yamamoto took it personally. He had promised the emperor victory. Now he needed a grand victory, one that would destroy the American carriers and crush their spirit before it could grow. His target, Midway Atoll, a tiny island halfway across the Pacific. If Japan could seize it, the U.S. Navy would be forced into open battle, and Japan could finally end the American threat. But unknown to Yamamoto, America had already broken Japan's naval code. The U.S. knew where and when the attack would come. It was the perfect trap. June 4th, 1942. At dawn, Japanese bombers struck Midway. The island burned, but the real battle was just beginning. From the clouds, American dive bombers descended like hawks. Within minutes, 3 of Japan's four carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, were engulfed in flames. By nightfall, the 4th, Hiryu, followed them to the bottom of the sea. 4 carriers gone. Hundreds of elite pilots dead. Japan's naval power was broken in a single day. Yamamoto watched in silence as the reports came in. His dream of a Pacific empire began to sink with the ships he loved. The tide of war had turned, and it would never turn back. In the months that followed, the Allies began to push across the Pacific, island by island. Guadalcanal, the Solomon Islands, New Guinea, each became a nightmare of mud, blood, and sacrifice. Japan's soldiers fought with terrifying determination, refusing to surrender, believing death for the emperor was a holy duty. But courage alone could not stop hunger, disease, and the endless power of American industry. Every island cost Japan thousands of lives. It could not replace every victory, for America brought their bombers closer to Tokyo. In April 1943, Yamamoto's fate was sealed. American code breakers learned of his inspection flight over the Solomon Islands. The 38 fighters ambushed his plane in midair. The man who had planned Pearl Harbor died in the jungle, his body still seated in his chair. For Japan, it was the death of hope itself. By 1944, the war had become a disaster. Japan's navy was shattered, its air force reduced to boys barely out of school. The Americans invaded the Philippines, and the once proud Japanese fleet sailed one last time, to die in the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in history. When defeat became certain, Japan unleashed a new weapon. The kamikaze pilots were ordered to crash their planes into American ships, turning themselves into human bombs. They called it honor, the world called it desperation. Even as the empire burned, its leaders refused to surrender. They spoke of fighting to the last man, turning every city into a fortress. But the fire was spreading faster than faith. By 1945, American bombers darkened Japan's skies. Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, all reduced to ashes. Millions lost their homes, hundreds of thousands lost their lives. The once proud empire was dying in fire. Then came the final blow. August 6th, 1945. Hiroshima. A single bomb, brighter than 1,000 suns. In seconds, the city vanished. 80,000 people were gone in an instant. 3 days later, Nagasaki. Another flash, another city erased. For the first time, even the most loyal generals knew the truth. The war was lost. On August 15th, 1945, Emperor Hirohito's voice was heard by his people for the first time. He spoke softly, his words trembling with sorrow. The war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. We must endure the unendurable and bear the unbearable. The empire surrendered. The rising sun fell. World War II, for Japan, for Asia, for the world, was over. The land lay in ruins, cities were dust, and the people faced hunger, shame, and loss. But out of that devastation, something new began to grow from the ashes of empire. Japan would rise again, not as a conqueror but as a builder, a maker, a dreamer. Its swords would become steel for cars, its bombs replaced by cameras, radios, and art. The rising sun would shine once more, not in war, but in peace. And so ended Japan's great gamble, a war that began with ambition and ended in ash. A war that turned a proud nation into a broken one, and a broken one into something the world would never forget, because history remembers not only those who fight, but those who learn.